happen, but I also haven't had to reset my entire rig right before the stream, so definitely know that for future reference. So yeah, if you're trying to learn some stuff about all the contact players, I'm just gonna take tomorrow to do it and then add it as like a 6.5 to week 6. You didn't miss anything yet. OTT time, baby. Ay, all right. So I'm pretty sure I have this open already. Okay, so in the outline here, I included the entire multiband, pretty much manual description. We're going to kind of talk about that. We've also talked about a lot of stuff like this, which is up and down compression, expansion, what the dynamic range is, all that stuff. So the manual also kind of teaches you a little bit about that. So I recommend reading pretty much the Ableton manual for a lot of stuff, mainly because it is stock. So it is like something they're trying to guide you through. Okay, so we talked about this last week, which is pretty much how does you know, a compressor work and how much do we need to know about the ratio and what is expansion, all that stuff. So this first part is the rehash. So I just didn't take that out of the last class just so you can have it for reference for this class, because we're not going to be really going too deep into what all this means now, just because we've talked a lot about that. Also, this is going to be pretty much what we talked the most about, is how to use the ratio to your advantage, when to be, you know, subtle with it, and when to just kind of crank it up. Friendship ended with compression. Now multiband is my best friend. I like it, but what if you need a compressor on each band? Then friendship back on? Friendship tripled. Dude, that's what happens though. Sometimes you need to break up with friends so you can rebuild stronger. All right, so pretty much the only thing we touched on last week was de-essing, which was how to kind of split your signal and then just compress the highs and stuff. All right, so now multiband compression is ×3 or ×5 plus for Pro MB or isotope multiband dynamics. Hell yeah, yeah. Definitely down to make this class more accessible for everybody as well. Anyways, so yeah, band splitting, that's probably the biggest, you know, thing about multi-band compressors in general, is like, how is the phase aligning in each band split? Because when you create a band in an EQ, it creates phase smearing. So same thing happens inside of a multi-band compressor. So just kind of need to keep that in mind when you're working with these type of plugins. The multi-band compressor in Ableton has come a long way. I also have a session open. I'm just going to compress stuff in, just as a example. It's just a random session, but kind of like it. Probably going to finish it soon. But yeah, so how does phase align? How does that split up? And how does it come all back together? So whenever you create like a multi-band inside of isotope, you can see like a new, I guess, curve form. It's actually just dynamics. So this stuff is like linear phase at a mastering level. That's kind of the point I'm making inside of the little outline here, is that linear phase is really crucial for multi-band compression, because if it's not linear phase, then it will create phase problems. And that's not something you really want inside of like a master, say if you're going to be using a multi-band compressor on a master. And I only use, you know, like linear phase multibands on masters as well. And to your guys' questions, how would zero latency have better phase relationship if it can't read ahead for phase? And so that's a good point. So it does have zero latency because it is over processing, so it's getting a little bit more processing in order to get, you know, zero latency, but almost linear phase. So like in all the Pro Qs and in the Pro MB, the zero latency mode is close to linear phase, but it's not. So same thing goes with all of these plugins too. So when we look at this is linear phase. There is no look ahead. There's no look ahead function. You have softney, RMS, peak, time knob, output. Open this caret, sidechain functions. There's no look ahead on this multiband. You can right click, there's no oversampling mode. So this is zero latency, meaning that it's at some point going to screw up. And I've had that happen with OTTs a lot. Sometimes they'll glitch out and just put out a ringing or just some kind of buzzing signal. And that's just from over compression and over expansion. And then to Miri's question, why split up phases? Because of the phase smearing that happens when you kind of split up a signal multiple ways. So it's kind of like a copy of a signal now. And so now when the copy comes back into focus or sums with the rest of the frequency range, it needs to start at the exact same time. So if it doesn't, exactly to all the other questions where, you know, it needs that buffer to actually line up the start position between those different bands. So, you know, that's one of the reasons why like de-essers will have a ton of look ahead and everything like that, so they don't phase out the highs of something they're trying to like subtly process. Doesn't mean it's bad. It means that at some point you might want to go and check on it. And like I've really only had this problem like 9.5 up to the beginning of 10, and then they released this update with like 10.3 and changed some of the key commands, and now it's like in phase. So yes, so look ahead is buffer or oversampling. They're all describing the same function. So analog compressors don't have look ahead, and that's why it smacks, right? Yeah. Now analog compressors have natural tube saturation for gain staging, so that's why they snack. And they also have real opto compression, which real opto compression requires a light to turn off and on. And when that light turns off and on based on the impulse or transduction that happens on the input, then it changes the way it shapes the envelope. So opto compression, optical, that's what it's talking about. So all those like auto functions in, or like envelope followers in like a analog setting are a little bit more natural. Everything in a digital setting is an emulation. All right, so yeah, just wanted to touch on that before I open up this session, play it. So I haven't had very many problems with the multiband recently, but there have been problems within the past where I've done tests, you know, phase canceling a signal and part of the mid-range still comes through. So like if that happens at all, then your phase is out of alignment. And that was kind of like, if anybody saw that Twitter post from Decap talking about, you know, is FL worse or better than Ableton? And does it have to do with something with the summing engine? And no. So if your summing engine was off, just to kind of like talk about phase relationship again, left and right channel going into your master channel might be off. So that kind of used to happen in like 32-bit environments and non-float environments like Pro Tools. Pro Tools, if you had a shitty system, would just put out your entire track out of phase just because it can't handle itself. And that was one of the functions of just having no automatic delay compensation. So this is always going to be on. So if you went and created a audio effects rack here, that had band splitting, and I have one just because I sometimes do this. So I have a band split with macro, and this is a band split multiband compressor. I can actually share this out as well, until I forgot. But I got a few other weird splitters. So this is made with the intention of it introducing phase at some point. So I like the crossovers to be locked together when I do stuff like this. So this is like using the multipass or something inside of kilohertz or whatever else. There's also Blue Cat Audio has a modular patch bay as well that you could do stuff like with plugins specifically. Yes, that is actually why in Pro Tools they told you to keep the faders at 0 at the beginning. This was a problem in like 7 and 8. 9 kind of merged HD and LE delay compensation functions. 8 was the beginning of that. Oh yeah, nothing was floating point up until like floating point existed in Sony Acid Pro, Audacity, Logic. I think Cubase and Nuendo. Nuendo probably was the highest end floating point summing engine, hence why it's literally $2,000 still for that program. If anybody knows Nuendo 6 now, shit's amazing. It was amazing back then. That's kind of what I started on. But anyways. So, if you split it up like this, you can create some interesting effects, stuff like that. So I have a ton of OTT on this track already. A lot of it's just spatial expansion. So my OTT presets are kind of set to let the compression breathe. I don't really like to squish it too much. So how do you do that? And let's just talk about some key command functions here. Now we're getting into OTT. So remember, option will move the thresholds of both the expander and compressor. If I hold down shift, it will allow me to trim both at the same time. Same thing with option. Shift, option, actually, sorry about that. Now it's option command. Option command will trim all of your bands. Hold down command, it will trim all of your compression bands. And then if you do option command trim on your ratio, it will trim all your ratios at the same time. So this is like a really easy way to use the OTT functions. Downwards expansion now and upwards compression, or just keep squishing. Yeah, so command, trim, option, one band. Command option does it to all bands. So based on your selection. So you have a trim tool and another trim tool. You know, I guess a vertical trim, horizontal trim. Yes, I do recommend moving all of them at once. So let's just load up the regular OTT. So this is what it looks like by default. So make note of what you are doing to your sound. So you're boosting all of your inputs. You have a softney and RMS on as well. RMS means it's going to act on the average signal. So it's going to give you a more, I guess, glue compressed type sound. So it's going to sound balanced, sustained. That's really what compressing the RMS signal is really for, giving it more LUFS, less dynamic range. Okay, so trimming like this is really where I start, but I like to let the mid-range breathe a little bit more, so I'll trim that first, and then I'll just kind of like use command while I'm trimming. So just easy, like that. So just like a couple moves, and then I can go and dial my time the way I want it to accent. So, you know, I'm doing this because of this output gaining right here, usually. So what's happening is it's compressing it really hard. with a very high ratio. So it's literally limiting while expanding. So it's pushing it into a wall, each band. And then it's going and creating a small EQ on the output. So boosting the lows, scooping the mids, and then boosting the highs. So once you open up the compression, it's going to give you a lot of amplitude. I've calculated it to about -8 to -10 plus. So I'll pull down the output by about that much. And then if you want to accent the sustain, pull down the time. If you want to accent the transient, push up the time. So I like to accent the transient by default, hence why my preset is like this. So it has all these functions just so I can have it on full 100% amount. And my philosophy, I guess, with using compression and processing in general is it doesn't just sound louder, it sounds better. So I can make anything sound loud by turning it up in any setting, including inside of my DAW. I can just crank it up, duplicate the track. Doesn't matter, make it louder. But does it sound better louder? That's kind of like where I'm trying to kind of like use the OTT just in like sparing moments, or, you know, back off a lot of the functions so it doesn't crush it too much and kind of gives me a little bit more control of the sustain of each band. That's really what it's doing here. So yeah, let's listen to this track, and then I'm going to start using OTT as well. Let's undo that. This is kind of a jizza flip.
When I was little, my father was famous. He was the greatest samurai in the empire, and he was the Shogun's decapitator. He cut off the heads of 131
Okay, so to Stosi's comment, yes. So if you go and like compress everything and give it sustain all the way up into the master, you won't have to do as much. You know, so this one's super loud, and I'm doing a lot of compression just because I was really trying to go for a very like weird industrial fucked up vibe. I don't even know what I was on when I was like doing this. Not like on, but what I was thinking about while I was making this. It's probably directly after this session when I was making this, and then kind of went with it pretty much. So only amen breaks, and I forget what, oh yeah, this is a pipa one of my friends recorded. And then Jizza Liquid Swords.
When I was little.
Okay, so yeah, you know, this is over compressed right now, so I like to go and, you know, dial everything back at some point. I also keep it somewhat sparing at the beginning, just for, you know, mixed purposes later, and then also just to kind of make sure everything fits together from the start. And I'm hyped on it. So that's one thing OTT is just really good for, is it gets you hyped on your music. Yeah. So to Area 32's point, when your limiter is being over I guess stimulated, it creates all types of distortion. It's processing and actually pulling down the dynamics of your track because it's not mixed correctly. What happens usually is that your bass is too loud, or your highs are too loud, or one part of your mix is too loud, and then it's making your limiter kind of like dip the rest of the mix because something else hit it first. Yeah. So it really expands the sound. So that's pretty much what the point of expansion is. It's just like juicing everything that's already there. Like, I don't have OTT on things that I want to fill the background with. That's one huge kind of like workflow choice with OTT, because like it's really easy to use it on everything. Just because it's literally the sound goodizer of Ableton. And one reason why I don't like Xpers is because it doesn't have any control. It's just out of control smash. It's literally just, locked thresholds and a time knob. So I'm just really not about that. So is OTT more used like a saturation than a dynamic compression? That's actually a good question, because it is. Whenever you go and over, compress and smash anything, it starts to distort it. So you can actually make that really, really evident. I think I did that last week where I turned a sine wave into a like hard clipped sound. But with OTT, you can kind of do that super easy, just because you can actually compress it per band. So like, just to demonstrate this, I get this out of a group with reverb all over it. Okay, so I have this sub here. I want to add, distortion to it. It's already distorting a little bit. So we don't have a envelope readout on here, but we do have control over the attack and release. So time knob multiplies this number, or divides it. Dividing it will pretty much make it sustain for longer. So release starts to pull down, attack starts to pull down, meaning it's compressing it quicker and then recompressing it quicker. Because whenever the release stage is done, it starts to recompress. So quicker release time, quicker compression. So if I go and compress this really hard without even using this, I can create distortion by pulling down this release to millisecond values like this. So what I'm doing right now is I'm actually like creating a low pass gate. And then the over compression is creating distortion, which is like a tube. So this is almost like a dynamic tube compressor now. So more release, less distortion. So when I push this time knob up and multiply it, it actually allows for the transient to pass. And then you get a bunch of pop out of the snare, or anything that you're trying to make like a little bit transient bass. Like if I wanted to give a little bit of pop to the sub, added like an attack. All right, so when the time is divided and the signal isn't passing the threshold of the expander. It will now bring up that low level information to the top. So whatever distortion or just natural clipping that it's running through right now is going to be accented if I go and push the highs in this. So how do I use that on a sub is with erosion or a white noise sub. So I like to add just a tiny amount of noise to it, and then I expand it. So more attack, more sustain. More attack, more sustain. Transient, sustain. Okay, so I like to do this when I have like release curves set on my envelopes. Like if I'm going to like let it release like this. And this is a parallel CBA. So I'm gonna push this up here, here, and then give this a little bit. So if I wanted that all to be level and I didn't want that noise to pop out after it, I would push this time like this. So I can just crush this sub to like hell and back. And then I'd probably run it through a saturator after that, soft clip it, medium curve. Whoops. Okay, so when I pull this output back here, it takes off the natural like saturation that's happening when I run it through the wave shaper. So you'll notice that around 8 dB, you're going to hear the least amount of saturation. And then also on the gain stage here, which is the output meter, definitely want to keep it below 0. You know, so I usually keep it below 0 when I'm going and gain staging my plugins. Even when I'm going and adding multiple OTTs here. So I'm still going to gain stage between these. That's a lot of tail. But yeah, it sounds pretty cool too. You know, so it's like this is something with OTT that a lot of people will just kind of keep stacking, 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 you know, but really like you're losing a lot of punch. Just reading catch up on hands, your comment here. But yes, you're completely right on that. And the scooped like middle EQ shape like really takes a lot from other instruments. Say if you're going to put it on like a snare or whatever, then it allows like the body to kind of come through, specifically to get more pop and get it to pop through the mix. Like pop meaning punch and then presence. Because like if you're going and scooping out your mid-range on your sub, like a really distorted sub, then that's going to create a lot of room for the mid-range on your kick. Because then I'm going to go and sidechain this sub, so then the low end's going to just completely move out of the way, and then I'm going to have room for the mid-range tail. And yeah, just to finish on this point right before. Um, I've seen a lot of producers just use OTT as straight up mixing tool, and just use that in sparing amounts because it's adding hype, it's adding sustain. It does pretty much everything that you really need to your sound, exactly like a sound goodizer. But you know, there's a lot of things that people are missing by not, being able to control it. And then you have to go and reprocess post OTT in order to juice it back out. Say if you lose transient definition, you're gonna have to use a transient designer post an OTT in order to get it. So what's the point of adding so much OTT? Over compression, hyper compression. People want to hear it more hype. So what does it mean to do more hype when you know absolutely nothing? Is give it one more. So, like I remember talking to the M Machine dudes about Porter Robinson once, and they were just like talking about one of his Logic sessions, and I think it was on Worlds or something. One of the 808s he made completely out of stacking a compressor over 10 times in Logic. So it wasn't OTT there, but it was like over compression to the max. And you can go and do that by just adding like a basic compression curve. Because compression curves are existent in tube and solid state circuits. So naturally, if you go and over compress something, it'll create new harmonics. It'll make it sound like it's better. So it's distorting things to create new harmonics. So OTT juices what's already there and then potentially distorts new things into existence. So what's that mean for sound design? Is that we can go and expand something to pretty much the nth degree and then dial it back. So I have, a clipper on the end here so it doesn't actually clip zero. I can also gain stage in between my OTTs in order to get more of the actual sound of it. I could also use the amount knob to mix it in with the other sound. So just gradually mix it in. But this is less of a mixing tool right now, more of a sound design tool. Because if I was to use OTT and like this in a plugin setting, which would be like trash, this would just be me hard curving every single band. Yeah, exactly. So to what Stosu just said, it would be much different to what a clipper could actually do. It would be similar to like what Saturn can kind of do actually, and the new Saturn can actually do. And also Trash. Trash is one of those sweet designers as well. And Melda Instruments, of course. Everything Melda is like really, really good for this kind of stuff. But yeah, this is just a really, really common tool I see everybody kind of abusing. So I feel like it would be beneficial for people to kind of know what they're doing in it. So what I do per band, is I go and decide how I want the envelope to be. So knowing how the time knob works, I can just go and do it to the whole thing and just call it a day, just for the sake of processing for right now. But if I was going to go and process, say, like a kit, let me get a kit up here. This is all stuff I'm going to add. I was like in the middle of adding to this track. This is the one. So this kit I keep around, and I've been using it pretty much in every track. I use this kit and another kit that I put together. And these are just a bunch of boom bap sounds that I really like. But yeah, I like them because I can kind of manipulate their transients really easily. So like this one is kind of a deep pitched sub, so I can pitch this one up pretty easy and it becomes kind of like a trashy snare. So if I was going to use some OTT on this guy, and I have like an OTT preset for snares, just as a starting point. I don't like presets for processing because they kind of generalize what it should sound like and they don't really give you a good idea of what your situation should be, you know? It could be like rock preset number 1. And it's like, okay, well, that just has a really defined transient or sustain or whatever. But it really doesn't apply to your track. So it's really good to just know how you're using your own shit. Okay, so I have a few in here that just kind of like whatever randomly named. Snare. So in here, I pretty much am just hyping up everything. And then I'm also dividing the punch of the snare. I didn't actually dial this frequency in here, but I usually push this up and then pull this down. Yes, to Ori's point as well. We do hear loudness as a quality difference because louder equals better for a lot of people. Or just more hard equals more energy. People want something from the music and they're getting it from OTT. More energy equals more hype equals possibly the whole point of the entire track. So, it's a really good go-to for that. But yeah, for like my snare preset here, yeah, definitely push this up to the low end of the snare. So might bring up a spectrum here if I was mixing. And so in a mixing situation, I would do that, is bring up a spectrum, just so I can see exactly what I'm going to do to the snare. Pay me. Okay, so it's around 350, around an F. So that's chill. So I'm going to push this to about 350, 340, around there. And then the body, I'm going to go make a mental note where that ends around. So the last really defined transient above 1K is usually where I look. There's all that guide to how to, EQ a snare is also a guide to how to compress a snare, how to multiband compress, how to saturate. It's all of that because it just defines qualities and different instruments. And so once you know those qualities, you know what you want to do to that stuff, which is it needs to be brighter. I need more snare. I need whatever. You need to be able to quantify exactly what you want from it, so you can be really intentional with any multiband compressor, not just OTT. Okay, so that sounds pretty snappy. I want to get the high end to just be a little bit more snappy, so I'm going to back off the attack to let the transient through. And I can now look at my sample to see exactly how long this transient is. So transient will be the loudest thing here. So about 30 milliseconds, around there. So that means I will push my attack to after 30 milliseconds. Okay, so now if I use the expander like this, where I go and back off the attack to 30 milliseconds plus, which is after the transient, and I just calculated that, and then I go and pull back the release so it goes and refires quicker. Then when I use the expander and pull up the threshold, it's going to bring up the low level information of that band, as well as bring up the transient and let the transient through. So I can even use this inversely here if I really want to accent that transient, and I can use the compressor in upwards compression mode, where now once this transient passes here, it goes and pushes it up, and I can even have it catch like the end of the transient now if I want to do that, although I'm not sure if I want to do that yet, so that might be a little bit too much. So I like that, but then there's all this like high-end frequency movement in the background there. So what I would do now would be go into something like alloy or neutron. If it's above 800 hertz, I'll go into a multiband transient designer. This is literally the same concept as multiband compression, except with multiband compression, you have to know exactly what you're doing. So I'm going to pull down sustain of 800 hertz. All right, so I'm going to add another band here. Ooh, actually we only have 3 bands in this one. My bad. All right, so I'm going to pull this up, and then we're just going to go and isolate this one frequency then. I'm going to start it at about 800 hertz, around there, up to about 3K. Now pull down sustain, push the attack just a little bit. I'm also going to put this post compression so I'm not transient designing into my compressor. All right, so I'm going to combine these two to kind of bring both of those bands down there. Cool. All right, so that brings down a lot of that like higher level information. Now I'm just going to fade it out on the end here so we don't have as much of a tail. So it takes multiple different angles in order to effectively shape the envelope of something you want. So it's like, I want this to end here. I want it to, you know, kind of pull back its transient. I want to expand its transient. So it's like, I want both of those things, you know, so it becomes kind of a, you know, a not guessing and checking, but fine tuning to taste. So it's starting extreme, then dialing back. Okay, so now that I pulled back the envelope, I can kind of be a little bit more lenient here. Cool. All right, so then after this, now that I've shaped it, I might run into a saturator, another transient designer. So it's just a bunch of things. My favorite transient designer right now is Smack Attack. Smack Attack. This Smack Attack is waves. I just really like its envelope follower. And then I like the limiter. Okay, so these two before. So it gives me all that definition. I get all my frequencies pushed up and hyped. I get a little bit controlled in alloy because this one's not going to be doing too much. I don't really want to scoop out too much of the envelope information from each band. I want it to be controlled, not eliminate entirely. So a wideband transient designer, which I say these are very similar in the way they are used, because you are shaping the envelopes here. But, you know, wideband means all the frequencies, whereas multiband means per band. So this is just kind of like a way to kind of like use both of these in tandem together. So I don't ever stop with OTT. OTT is a juicer. It gets things louder and better. Better is louder. But I like to pull down the outputs and fine tune my amount. So it's not just louder, it's also better quality wise. So that's something you need to quantify. Once you go and gain match with the original gain of your sound, then you'll truly know whether or not it sounds better or just louder. So that means knowing the gain before the transient goes into the compressor and after. So, you know, this boost right here gives you a ton of gain into your output, but also gives a ton of gain to the signal going into the compression. So it gives more juice to that compression, smashes it harder, allows you to use the amount knob more as a mixer for that. So that's really the point of OTT being so ridiculous here. Because when you do pull back this amount, it's not like it's mixing in a dry and wet version of the compression. It's actually like pulling these back and making this worth less. It's like just kind of turning off all these parameters progressively, but just in the background. There's no actual readouts on this thing for us to actually control. All right, so just to rehash in here, Command, trim, all, Option, single band. If I do this to the bands while holding Command, which is the ratio trim, trims all those, both directions, Option plus Command. It used to be Option Shift. Now it's not. Oops. There we go. Magic Mouse wasn't liking that. Okay, so, there's a ton of ways to use OTT. Hopefully now you kind of understand what these parameters do a little bit more and can kind of experiment with them. So to rehash on like ratio, because we've been talking about attack and release, which is really the biggest important thing to know how to control inside of the OTT. Because whenever you use the time knob, it is directly affecting those. So now the B and A, which is above and below, above. So these ratios go from pretty much 10 to infinite. So it doesn't really give you that much value in between. You can hold down Shift and get finer values. But yeah, remember, anytime you go over 10, you're starting to limit, because that's bringing your actual incoming sound closer to 0 as opposed to 1. So when shaping something that's like de-essing, like just kind of gently shaving off pieces of a sound, so like what I need to do with this sound. Just Jizzle Liquid Swords. Listen to this album way too many times. Okay, so I'll even leave this on here. I'm soloing this high band, so I know I'm going to want to go in compressor and sibilance range, which I know is 7K up to about 12K. So 7K up to beyond is what it's set to right now. And I don't have control of setting it higher there, so I have to kind of set it from the high band only. So that's a limitation here. De-essing in Pro MB is a little bit easier. Okay, so I'm going to use this in compression mode. So now when I trim this back, we can see our above ratio change. So one thing that you kind of can note about this is that we see lines pop up here. So it says 3. So if this is 1, if this little line is 1, then we have 3 above it, 0.28, which is that extra little piece. So that represents 3 dB above 1 dB. So I noticed this when I just started looking more at this plugin, being like, well, why are those gradient lines there? And those are actually telling you your ratio. More lines, higher ratio. So you can see when you go and start to limit, this is how much your signal is being compressed. Above 1 dB, it's moving it closer to 0, which is closer to the threshold. 0 is the threshold. 1 is 1 dB above. So now it starts to move that relationship and give it less dynamic range. So that's the point of compression. Less dynamic range, less movement between the highest peak and the lowest peak. So it's all high peaks. So you bring up those low peaks, So now they're all high peaks. What's great with expansion is you don't have to compress the high peaks down, is you bring the low peaks up. So hopefully that makes really specific sense to you, which is how to like visualize compression. You know, that's a big one. Like I visualize compression, not just in like visualizing the waveform or whatever, but just in how I would use it, like what part of the spectrum it probably is, you know, just immediately when I hear something, you know, just to give it a quality and then give it some kind of process for me to do after. You know, just being an engineer and shit, that's just kind of shit you kind of get used to doing when working under the gun. Because, you know, I can't sit down and work on a mix for more than 2 hours if I'm being paid to work on a mix for 2 hours. So that's definitely something you have to keep in mind. Or say if you're producing in a session with somebody and you need to get it to sound beefy, like quick, because it's not just a homie. It's like Ice Cold Bishop is in the studio, bro. It's like you need to get that shit hyped now. So expanding into a limiter is giving us more pleasant artifacts than using an equivalent amount of downward compression and boosting gain after. Yes. So the more you bring your mix to a really balanced neg 6, and that's the standard. Mix to neg 6. Mix low for loudness. Bruv. Because when you go and mix at a lower dB range, then your actual loudness curves and dynamic range moves a little bit closer together. So when you go and push that up, meaning if you go and mix to neg 6, all of your peaks, all of your tracks are summing up to peak around neg 6, maybe go a little bit over neg 5, neg 4 on a couple peaks. That's healthy. That's natural. You're going to have extra peaks. But like, yeah, it should be pre-sausaged before going into the final sausaging. So if you really want to get to neg 1.5 lefts, you definitely have to get this under control, because like on this right over here, like this is probably the biggest thing in this mix. I'm gonna have to do a lot of transient designing in order to get a lot of it out of it, because I really want this just broken, decayed drum sound here. So I'm gonna kind of mix around that. I'm actually gonna leave this now just for the snare. I'm not gonna use multiple things in this rack just because I put so much processing on it. But I'm gonna stack this with my other kick here and then kind of like sidechain it together, because that's kind of how I fit together a lot of like super lo-fi stuff. If I wanted to sound just totally broken, you know, I wanted to also have weight still. I wanted to punch through the mix. I still wanted to have presence. So dynamics equals presence. What is presence? When somebody says it sounds too far back in the mix, that's opposite of presence. That's depth. You know, where it has, you know, reverb, it has space. You create depth by creating those proximity effects. So proximity effect is reverb. So when you're farther away from somebody, they have a reflection and they sound quieter. That's the first thing you notice, is volume and pan. So when you're starting with your mix, you know, I'm going to talk about this when you go into mixing class, but volume pan is where you start. But your brain also just starts there when it's quantifying a sound. A really good movie documentary to watch is What the Bleep Do We Know by Michio Kaku, because he goes through the experience of experiencing sound with your brain from a deaf person's perspective. And it's pretty amazing. That whole documentary is dope. Highly recommend, but it'll help you kind of visualize sound and how you're kind of perceiving it, even in your mixes, because like depth is a huge thing. Depth perception with music is not just effects and reverb. It's literally dynamic range. So it's like if somebody's right up next to your ear whispering, it's going to sound compressed and loud because it's too loud for your ear, so your ear is going to naturally compress it. Your ear has a compressor built into it by constricting its actual ear hole. Or getting oversaturated and your ciliae die, and then you can't hear that frequency anymore. But yes, shape the sausage before packaging it. You do need a contrast between loud and quiet, even in a smashed sausage mix. If you don't have that, it's not going to sound as loud when it's really supposed to be loud. You need dynamics in your breaks. You need dynamics in your verses. You need dynamics in your drums in general. So the transients need to be defined. It's why you can listen to, like, say, like a Carmack track or an EPROM, some of Shade's stuff. Shade's is mixed a lot quieter. But like Alex Perez mix as well, where everything just sounds really dynamic and upfront, punchy, but it's super loud, super present, and that's more of a mixing taste thing. I've seen a lot of Carmack production stuff, and it's definitely you know stream of consciousness kind of production. So it's like duplicate stuff to get it louder. Just turn stuff up, crank on the OTTs, just whatever it is to hype it up. And if you go, through the process of doing that always, and are always saying to yourself what you want from the sound, even with compression, EQ, effects in general, it's like the point of processing. You'll have more intentional decisions and just outcomes with your actual sounds. Because then you'll be like, I just need this louder, duplicate. It sounds louder, perfect. Maybe that's all it needed. Maybe it didn't need another OTT and more compression. Maybe it just needed to be 3 dB louder. Because 3 dB louder is more upfront for people, because we hear in increments of 3 dB. And that's like an exponential kind of curve. Okay, so, that's just a bunch of stuff about that. OTT is pretty amazing. I use it on everything. I also use Pro MB for a lot of stuff as well, hence why I included it in today. But I also use Isotope Dynamics a lot, just for mastering stuff specifically. So let me kind of define, and we're gonna go back through this when we go into the, I guess, 150, processing 150. That's why I called it, because it will be after we go into 110 with both sampling and synthesis, because I want to go and just create sounds and then apply processing to them. Yeah, so that's a really big thing with like keeping your mix together, is kind of knowing which effects to kind of like blast it up along the way, but also know how to mix with them, and how to dial it back when it needs to be dialed back, and also what should be present in the mix. If you're not making those mental notes, then you're going to kind of get lost. So first thing is a spotting session. So spotting sessions are when you sit down, and that's like a professional term. So like a spotting session, like I've had to do, was with just like teams of whatever thing I'm doing. And we all sit down with like project manager or whatever, and we all sit down with a notepad and then mark out the times of things we need fixed, times of things we have ideas for, but we don't say it until the thing is done. And so we just go through and mark off the times and discuss whether or not it needs to be changed or not. So do that with your own shit. Break out a notepad, listen through your shit, be like, it's too loud here, it's too loud there. Just make a checklist and start crossing off things on the list. And then you'll be setting up your mix rapidly while you're producing. Okay, so yeah, so Area 32, I definitely agree with that answer as well. So I think it's better to gain stage instead of using a limiter. Once you put a limiter, you're crushing the transients. So yes, you definitely want to gain stage. Gain staging is how you go and pull back your entire mix once you're setting your mix up after production. So I'll go and put a limiter, maybe a saturator on my master while I'm producing, and just produce into that. No problems, no fucks given. Mainly because I know that once I'm done, mixing is the easy part. I just want to be hyped the whole process, So I just put on a basic limiter and a basic saturator, and then I don't even do any processing to it. There's nothing being done to that to compress on my master besides me going over 0 on a track. So yeah, that kind of keeps me in check, allows me to kind of mix a little bit as well, but also keeps it a little bit more loud and present. But yeah, so then once you're done with all that, you just take everything off your master, pull back your mix, literally gain stage your entire mix. So now you're just highlighting all the tracks and pulling it back so the highest peak is hitting -6. And then you go and rebalance and reset up everything to go and do it. So yeah, Pro L is actually my go-to, Pro L2. It's definitely my favorite. I like gain-based limiters as opposed to threshold-based limiters because threshold-based limiters do a lot more compression than I want. And so that's why a lot of people say Pro L2 is better than isotope ozone limiter, which is not true. Neither is better than the other, including basic masters with the limiter and glue compressor, soft clipping. So those, all three of those, I guess, are gain-based limiters. So Pro L2, the limiter, and the glue compressor, or anything with soft clip, those are all gain-based. You run into 0, and then you clip off. Oh, the ADHD peak limiter. Yeah, so that's a very comp kind of like LA2A kind of emulator. Yeah, so that one's just a little bit different. Still gain-based though. So I use only gain-based limiters pretty much across the board because I just personally like that workflow. But approaching either is not different because in a gain-based limiter, you still have a ceiling, and that ceiling still has a release time. So that is your threshold, that is your compression. Once you hit the ceiling, it starts to compress, and this is your look ahead for that compression. So basic, but effective for what you need to do. You know, it really doesn't need to do much more than that. When you go and say one is better than the other from no place of knowledge, then you're really just making yourself look like an ass because there's really no difference. This has way more shit in it. It even has transient designing. So it's like, yeah, there's probably 25 more things that are just metering based that help you master things inside Pro L that aren't even using this gain knob. This is all people know how to use. Use your look ahead for 5 milliseconds so you have oversampling. I'm not gonna dive into that right now, but yeah, it's definitely the make or break thing with mixes. Like literally, like can you juice everything out before you get to your final master? And what I ended up doing, you know, further down my process when I was just kind of developing my workflow was mainly because of the culprit video. Literally, I just like have watched like 4 or 5 videos that just changed me, and I was just different after that. So that culprit video, he started doing stem mastering and shit, and I was like, oh shit, that's how you do it, because I've seen like when I've mixed metal, that's how people do it. And so he was mixing Nightmares in Reality that way. So I was like, oh shit, that's why it's so fucking loud. Opio also was the same way back in the day, because Opio also used to use Logic in floating point days. So Logic used to get a little bit louder than every other DAW for a bit. Yeah, just put Trash 2 on a master, dude. But yeah, Trash on your master is pretty cool. I use Ableton Saturator because wave shaping is good. I like it. It glues stuff together. I don't usually use DC correction on my masters though, because that should already be fixed by the time I get to my master. I shouldn't. Anytime I go into a master with compression or any type of effects, there's no spatial effects, there's no phase alignment effects. That just brings other things out of phase in order to save one thing. So that's a thing that you need to fix in your mix. So mix should not be, you know, like the final polish, really. Mix should be how to get all your dynamic range, how to get everything kind of pieced together and then how to push it into the master. So you need experience on how to kind of like bring all that stuff up in stem master or stem mix, because I define them as two different things. Other people don't, and that's fine if you don't. Personally, I look up to one mastering engineer who goes by Dark Art Masters, and he's also Hive DMB. He's the drum bass producer, one of my favorite mastering engineers, and yeah, he talks all about that. He also masters Glitch Mob and Mad Decent, Ausla, Dimac, shit. So Dark Art, yeah, Dark Art's the shit. Definitely read a couple of his blog posts. Yeah, so there's a lot of questions coming in right now. All right, so Jade Cicada's metering thing, yeah, it looked pretty cool. I definitely want to check that out. I haven't checked it out yet though. So you can emulate tape saturation a little bit. I would use the tape saturator emulator for that if you're trying to get specifically tape saturation. Trash 2 is a little bit wonky, so I would use it only for wave shaping. So yeah, I don't fix phase alignment in my master ever, which means I don't ever use an imager on my master. And to Mary's question, what do I mean by DC? DC correction is phase offset on your zero crossing, which is phase alignment. So I never do anything that has to do with phase on my master. I will phase align if I am doing a hybrid master, which means I'm printing stuff through analog and I'm printing stuff through digital, and I'm combining them together in parallel tracks. So I'll go and master one track from 6 or 7 different parallels that are all summing together. So there's many ways to do it. Edit does do most of the mastering, but definitely learn from him because he teaches as well. He will teach you if you pay him. But yeah, no, there's a whole article, and they definitely rave about him. So, all right, so now let's talk about Pro MB. Kind of move on. Spent a whole hour on OTT, and so you should kind of be an OTT god now, just like God mode. Just kidding. Maybe. Hopefully. So remember the key commands though. Option command combines all. Option is one band. Trim, 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 trim. All right, so you can do all that stuff. So for your homework, I have required you to make your own OTT preset. That is your homework. You need to make your own preset for OTT. That means starting from the OTT preset in Ableton, or finding another plugin that does something like that if you're not in Ableton, which is kind of like Pro MB or something else. But expansion compression, that's what you're looking for. Yeah, exactly. I know there's a couple other people that are on FL as well. Yeah, Pro MB will probably be your go-to for that. But you can also use isotope dynamics. There's a bunch of other ways you can do this. Okay, so that's kind of what I want you to do. If you do have access to Ableton, just go out of your way to use Ableton just this once, you know, and make a preset, just so you can kind of get a hang of it. You know, of course, like Ableton is a really great tool for sound design in general. I use it for professional shit when I'm told not to, because it doesn't have SMPTE sync. It has all these different SMPTE values, but no sync. So everybody that works on film shit or TV shit, there's like, do not work in Ableton. If we want the session after, we will know. And then I'm like, all right, dude, you'll know. Little did they know. It was all in Ableton. And I just dropped it in Logic with an OMF file. Ha. All right, so yeah, I just want you to go and kind of dial it in for different sections. One thing I actually do a lot with just starting up my sessions and stuff, say if I was like starting up and this was my little beat here, And then we'll just grab some bass. So I have this. I have a couple different like drum presets in here that I like to use, and then also in my actually no, not this one. There's a different one where I have like OTTs built into some of the samples because they're just not hyped enough. But yeah, I use this kick preset a lot because this has like a dialed up mid range, and then also kind of boosts everything inside the signal. So I will use this in like sparing amounts and then run it into like a drum bus. So I like the drum bus because it has all the stuff I like built into it. Push up the damp. Usually have this off unless I need sub. This is just all sub. Okay, so listen to it without this, and I'm going to compress this bass in a second just to kind of show you a couple more tricks on what I do, qualifying some stuff. All right, so take this off, take the other thing off. Probably pretty loud. So this is going to compress those lows a little bit so they're not too boomy. So I do kind of pull this down a little bit. Sometimes I'll push up into my ratio here. And I actually did it for all these just to kind of hype them a little bit. So I'm actually crushing and full smash OTT on the low end. So what am I intending to do to each band there? Is it smoothing out on the sustains, on the mids, so it pops through more? Yes. So I am pushing the actual lows here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to sustain them a little bit more, so quicker attack, quicker release. I'm not going to do it to distortion mode, but I will give it a little bit of juice. And then I'm going to hype the mid-range a little bit and let the transient through on that. And then if it really needs it, I'll do something to the highs. Highs I usually leave untouched and might even pull back both thresholds. Just because I want the low mids and the lows to kind of really pop together. And then I'll use the drum bus to kind of limit it and use soft clipping. Yeah, it sounds good. This snare just has a lot of low end. It's a high pass. All right, so notice I'm using this in one-shot mode because I do want it just to play out to its end, and I don't want it to have a envelope release curve, so I'm just having it play out using the fade out as an envelope controller in conjunction with my compression. So what do I do once I'm kind of at the next stage is this. So I will start to process both together, do my thing, and then I'll go and split it out into its own track. You can option drag and it goes and keeps that there, but what I do in a real situation, just drag it. And so I take all the MIDI, put it in its own drum rack, and then if there's processing I really like on it and I want it to be separate, I'll just go and drag and drop that too. All right, so let's hear this. All right, so again, while you're producing, don't really worry about dynamic range. Worry about hype. Worry about something you like, something you're willing to listen to 100 times over and over and over again. You know, in order to really like just kind of develop your own style and taste with stuff. The quicker you are with your own processing chains, the quicker you are with your own sound. All right, cool. All right, so this part right here doesn't have that much reverb, so I'm gonna actually use this. The other parts I can actually use a lot of that, but okay, so I'm gonna just kind of trim these up for now. I'm also gonna pull this back to 100 because now what I want from this, and for like very specific reasons, because it has these frequency ranges in it, when anything has sub or low end, I want that sub to be sustained, because if it's sustained, then I don't actually need that much amplitude to it because it has more overall power, has more RMS average signal. So when we go and compress lows and anything low end, we want it to actually have sustain. And when I go and compress like my bass guitar and stuff, like through like processing on a separate amp and stuff, that's literally what I'm going for. I'm going for maybe letting the pop through, but I actually don't want transients to pop through. I want it to wrangle those transients in and bring up the low level information, so that there was like a huge like mid-range pop in here, I'd actually pull this down to make it hit it. Maybe pull up this compression so it doesn't limit it entirely, but you know. Okay, so now I'm compressing the shit out of this, destroying it. So I'm pushing up this low end really hot, and I'm scooping out all the mids because I kind of do want to have that band rejected sound, just on this. So when I do compress bass sounds, I band reject, even so, even if it's not, you know, some kind of a weird effect like this. I'll go and reject about 150 hertz to about 250 hertz, somewhere around the low mid range, to cut room for the kick and allow things to breathe, because it gets really, really congested around that area with just kicks in general. So say if I wanted to move stuff out of the way, and I actually have a section in the outline about side chaining. This is something that I do every now and then. So like I'll go and side chain to the kick on a multiband compressor. Let's find that. 13. Then. All right, so shorty kick, patched. So now I'm going to compress the lows only to my kick. Like, I've been watching Mo Vibes, and he legit barely changes default setting of some of the stocks, and I'm like, damn, that was all you were doing this whole time. Yeah, so a lot of people are like that. You know, it's really just about how hype you are on the sound, how much you're able to make decisions along the way, with just deciding on what sounds there should be in your track. You know, because if you don't, then it's really hard to tell exactly where to go with the processing, because there's so much shit going on. You know, like, it's really easy to get trapped into loop soup, where just so many different loops stacked on top of each other. that you can't even process around them anymore. So that's something to keep in mind when you start stacking the shit in there. Because exactly like that, you know, where Mo Vibes is like that, Homie Visceral's like that, Aleph's like that. You're just like, a lot of people just use stock shit every now and then. Cerrito's like that too, you know? But, you know, it's like really about how you choose the sounds for the space, because the less things you have going on there, the more punch you will have for your dynamic range. And I bet you money that a lot of Moody Good sessions are kind of like that too, where it's all about hype from the main sound, and then with his masters, it's very, very gentle, where it actually is just literally pushing it right over the top. It's already compressed and smashed up to this point. And I've seen some of Skrillex's sessions, and he definitely Skrillex is a bunch of sounds exactly like this. All right, so this actual bass here, somewhat of a bad example. I'm gonna bring in a different resample here, but right now what I'm doing is a pretty much sidechain just to 40 hertz and below. You can see kind of snap in there and snap out. You do need to have a somewhat quick attack and release, and also a heavy ratio. So band reject literally means reject one band of frequency. So in a band reject setting with a EQ, it's literally phasing out one band of frequency. So it rejects that one band because it's phased out of existence down to neg infinity. So in a band reject, in this sense, I'm compressing one set of frequencies, rejecting that, or scooping the mids hard with a bell curve. So this is actually what I'm doing, like the physical process, because this is a bell curve that scoops here, but does not eliminate it down to a neg infinity. It's wonky. Okay. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm going to leave off with OTT for now. So we're going to be going back into this for pretty much every single sound. Again, de-essing is very self-explanatory. We already covered last week as well. So de-essing should not be a kind of mystical art. It's literally compressing the high bands only, high frequencies only, above 7K, in order to eliminate S syllables from different sounds. Boom chicka boom. Okay, so let's load up Pro MB now. So you do have a stereo and a mono version, just in case. Alright, so Pro MB is pretty easy to use. So we have the whole outline here. inside of the outline. And also, if you need more specific direction, again, on the multiband, it's all right here. So you don't have to dig through the manual. And also the sidechain portion. And we did all that. So now we're here. Okay, so this is where the manual is. Go find it if you don't have it. But once you hit the help meter, it should pop you directly there. Okay, so there's a bunch of things going on in Pro MB. So it's saying 6 bands of frequency. So 6 processing bands up to freely place anywhere in the spectrum. So you can turn them on and off super easily, and you can move them around super easily. Each band has, you know, not linear phase mode and dynamic, but it has the ability to change its curves, the ability to control its crossover. So that's huge. That's something that doesn't exist in most other dynamics processors. And this is just stuff about installation stuff. So I skipped over a lot of stuff after that and went straight to just the UI controls. So we got interactive multiband display. So that means we can open it up, click on a band, and it loads up. So now we have crossovers here. So I can move where the top and bottom of my band are. Band range, so where it compresses to. Threshold as well for that incoming signal. Attack, release, ratio, and knee. So we have a lot of knee control in this, and that's really cool. A lot of other ones do not have that. And we have band look ahead. So can anybody tell me why band look ahead would be dope? I'm asking the chat now, because knowing why this is dope would actually mean that you understand why look ahead is necessary. So that's type in the chat if you think you know. Controlling the phase relationship between bands. Give a couple more seconds here, or else Miri is the only answer. Accurately be able to compress the band. Less harsh. Okay, so yeah. Time up. All right, so it is controlling the phase between each band. We have oversampling mode and linear phase mode, so that actually isn't so much of a problem. What really is the big thing here, because, you know, look ahead does specifically add latency to it. What it does is it allows faster frequencies, or frequencies being compressed more harshly. It allows them to be compressed less distorted. So if it is being compressed at a really fast rate with a high look ahead, you can kind of maintain some of the harmonic content without adding too many artifacts. So artifacts or distortion exist in OTT in plenty. There's so many artifacts you don't even know what to do with. A lot of people, they don't even realize that they like digital clipping. I don't think they want to admit it. You know, but it's all good. The digital clipper actually sounds like the way OTT compresses the shit out of things. So there's very, very, defined reasons why that's cool. So more efficient processing with added time. Yes. So when you go and compress things over time, so like if I was going to load up Pro L kick. Bollocks. Really gonna make me put the hyphen in, huh? No, man. You're missing a hyphen there, bro.
My father was
All right, so all those little peaks in there, that's distortion. So this thing is distorting to hell and back for this limiter here because it is hitting over 0. So when you go and over compress on a limiter, distortion becomes a flat line of negative dynamics. So now you're compressing, distorting because your sub is too loud, and so now your limiter is pulling back about 4 to 5 dB of perceived loudness because of that. So that means if you're compressing something that's happening really quickly or compressing it harshly up in the higher register here, or even a lower register, which would be the harsh section, look ahead will allow you to have less of that distortion again. So digital clipping will happen when you do that. Is there a downside to using a lot of look ahead besides latency? Processing. So it adds more processing to your session as well. So if you end up doing this to 10 plus instruments, you're going to really be smashing your computer a lot. Yeah, everybody was kind of right. So look ahead should be kind of self-explanatory at this point because we've looked at it ahead of time. A bunch of times. So you can turn that on and off here per band. So now if it's off, you don't see it anymore. If it's on, it should pop back in. Days. Okay, so how does Pro MB work? Let's get into that. So Pro MB is kind of like a mixture of a dynamic EQ and a multi-band compressor because we have gain control, we have slope control. Can I be weird with this? How weird can I get with this? 2.8. Nope. Okay, so you can type in your direct band there. It's just multiples of 6. So 12, 24, 48. I believe they have 72 as well. Oh, nope, that's just Pro Q3. Probably Pro MB2. But that's still pretty steep for a compressor. So you can change the slope of your crossover for above and below this band. So that's really, really unique. No other multi-band kind of works like that. So general rule of thumb when you're, carving out frequency is cut sharp, boost wide. So if you're going to cut out something that was really harsh, say around like 3K, cut sharp right here, and then you can increase your bandwidth right here, make it really sharp. So right now I'm subtracting gain. Right now I'm using this in EQ mode. No neg. I should give this 48 too. Okay, so I'm gonna actually snap this back up to 0. Having a number pad is really nice. I haven't had it in so long. All right, so now our decibel range here will either expand or subtract. And we can change our mode into expander mode or compression mode. So right now, it's set to downwards expansion. So when it's not being resonated, it's always pushing down sound or reducing the ambient noise. Why would you want sloping compressor? In order to control how much of the sound you are carving out. So in every other compressor, you are combining band passes together. Now this is different because it's saying this is the line curve of your frequency spectrum, and this is your subtraction to that. And then it sums them together and creates nice blended crossovers. You can run them together and then kind of see the result. So that's really nice. I just really like having that. You can unlink them by hitting this little crossover unlink button at the top. You can add another one like that. So run them into each other to combine the crossover, and then you can cut them apart. You can change the crossover curve by double clicking now. So now you see how they sum together. So this is the only way a multiband compressor works in most other settings. So you can delete bands by hitting the little X here, and that will subtract the band. So remember, range is going to be where you compress to. This is going to be kind of your threshold, but it's not. You have a threshold and a ratio here. This is your dynamic kind of like contrast that you're allowing the compressor to now expand to. So now once it passes the threshold, it's going to turn up the transient by this much. So I might want to do this if it was a snare, something like that. So let's actually get this Pro MB on my snare, because this is another form of transient designing. All right, so now I want to go and find the low end, which is right around here. And I'm going to say once it crosses this threshold, increase it by plus 12 dB. And then my ratio now is going to be pretty much how close to that plus 12 dB am I going to get? How quickly am I going to get there? And with what type of curve am I going to get there with? And how clear is that curve going to get there? Like, how much do I look ahead to the incoming signal to go and find that perfect curve? So quicker attack, more expansion because that transient is really quick. So I really don't like this, the percentage amount, although you can kind of like get a feel for it after a while. I like milliseconds. I like to see numbers. I don't want to see percentages. But yeah, that's just how that works. And then we can go and smash it up to that range. Smashing in expansion world is turning it all the way up and keeping it all the way up. Okay, so downwards expansion means that when the expander is in off mode, it's subtracting the ambience. When it's upwards expansion, when expander is in off mode, it's not doing anything, but when the threshold is passed, it is added to. So now in the multiband dynamics in Ableton, the expander is saying anything below this threshold, push it up to the threshold. Whereas in Pro MB, it's saying once this threshold is passed, push it up to the top range. So you get a lot more specific control here. And we're going to go much deeper on Pro MB because Pro MB is a mastering tool. Pro MB is a sound design tool as well as a mixing tool. So it's a thing I use for all of those. I'm scrolling with my scroll wheel right now. I believe you can yeah, there it is. There it is. There it is. All right, so that was you have to click, highlight, and then scroll, and it gives you this gradient amount. So this is also unique. No other Even EQ is going to allow you to shape a slope like this. So again, I'm scrolling with my scroll wheel. And also, I'm doing OTT right now in multiband. What I should do is create an OTT preset for multiband and then become famous. All right, so a lot of the parameters in here work with scroll wheels. That's one thing I like about FabFilter stuff. So I can kind of be a little bit tactile with it, because when I use the scroll wheel, is like actually fine tune amounts too. Blasphemy. Pro MB is really dope for building dynamics into a sound. You can make one part of the sound quiet and another boost it when it hits, so you can mess with the perceived depth of sound. Yeah, so all that, and it's like really amazing for just being able to visualize the sound too. Having it in a nice like Pro Q like setting is crazy. Then we have dynamic phase, linear phase. Linear phase is mastery mode. Dynamic phase is the natural phase mode, or almost zero latency, 20 milliseconds. Then we have minimum phase, which is also 20 milliseconds. Let's turn off look ahead. Zero samples of latency now. Let's go back to dynamic phase. Also 0. And then let's go to linear. 3000. So there's a big difference there. Again, look ahead will add on to your overall latency. Dynamic phase is going to be the blending mode. So that's going to be like the spectral blurring, the EQ mode. So that's in it by default. Minimum phase is like zero latency, no blurring, trying to be transparent, good for a utility mixing tool. I use dynamic phase when I'm using it for like sound design on drums, which means hyping up a transient. So that can be an integral part of the drum design and part of designing a drum specifically, not even just mixing a drum, but actually using Serum to say design a drum, and then using Pro MB, Smack Attack, all this other stuff to like shape it before you go and print it into audio. And that's all the steps before you get your final snare preset that you've made into actual audio and making it sound good, is that you need to process it and do everything to it. Your synth is actually the kind of, I guess, the platform for you to go and synthesize it, but you don't always need to make the most perfect, doofy. I say doofy because that's the sound. It's like doof, doof, that kind of snare, the 909 snare with the hyped body, which that's a majority of like drum and bass snares, halftime snares, and a lot of dubstep, like melodic dubstep, like the original like electro house snare, which melodic dubstep uses, is a 909 snare. Just ran through a ton of reverb, layered with claps, all types of stuff. In some cases it's layered with real snares, but that really hyped crack transient is that it's coming from like a synthesized 909 snare. So 909 snares are really good for that. Okay, so Pro MB, definitely to start with, it's a little bit intimidating. I think there's presets for a lot of stuff. So you have a lot of stuff to work with here. And multiband compressors, don't feel, bad about using any presets. Don't feel bad about using a preset in a plugin in general. Feel bad about using cymatics presets only. I'm just kidding. Well, kind of. I'm kind of kidding about that. You should feel a little bit bad. Just a little bit bad. Just, just in the pit of your stomach. You're like, But I can't really take any compliments about this track because I use the cymatics preset. I can't have any plugins on my computer because that. But anyway, so Pro MB, definitely use it for sound design in out of Ableton setting. If I was out of Ableton in Pro Tools or Logic, I would just be flexing all the time, meaning using all these expensive plugins just to compress a snare. Like, nah, I just don't really like doing that. I just really like using stock to start. And, I make that, point in here that stock is fine. It just is all zero latency. And zero latency is great. You don't want latency, but, you know, at the end of the day, what are you sacrificing for that zero latency? And I define it as fast and loose. Whereas fast and loose means for Ableton, it means every single plugin in Ableton is built in the architecture of Max for Live. So that means it's maxing out the computer to get the zero latency and also maximize the processing in order to get it, meaning minimizing processing. So maximizing processing means that you have good code and everything runs nice and smooth and minimum footprint. So that's what stock is good for. But stock isn't really going to crash your session when it fucks up. Stock is going to slightly start to add little things into your sound that you're like, hold up, why is my snare sound completely fucked up right now? And I've literally gone through in mixes and found that my multibands or EQs have been completely glitched out and out of phase. And then I've had to restart my session or just delete that instance and redo it. So that's something you're trading off when you're using anything that's not a plugin. Because if Pro MB or any other plugin was to fuck up, it would just crash your session immediately, and you lose everything. Which, not so much of a problem anymore since we have backups. But ideally, you want that to happen. You want your session to crash. And why? Because you don't want your plugin to be telling you something it's not actually doing. You want it to be like, uh-oh, bro, I can't do it anymore. I don't feel right. I don't feel right. I'm not up to par. Shut it down. That's what the plugin does. Just goes, shut it down, bro. And then Ableton's like, hey, bro, so API 2500 is not coming back to work today, so you just gotta, Yeah, for some reason, my entire brain runs like a Pixar movie for Ableton plugins. All right, so there's a lot of stuff we can talk about still. There's not that many things inside of Pro MB here, but we got the main stuff, which is, what is this doing? This is compressing up or down. So when we go and shift this up, the compressor in upwards compression mode will hold the low-level ambient volume at this high level. So this is like an EQ, except now the EQ is actually compressing. And then in downwards compression mode, or normal mode, then it's subtracting neg 30 dB. And then we can add gain staging to the band, but notice how it scales. So it will kind of like limit you to about neg 30. And you don't get a representation of knee, but it does change on how fast your compressor will snap to these attack and release values. Literally the curve of your attack and release values. So, yeah, DJ Hammerhead, ask away. We're at the end of class, so ask your questions now about specific plugins and specific things, because this is where I definitely want to leave off on with Pro MB, because this is the accessibility stage. Just jump into it and fuck shit up. Oh, what's up, Yohas? Or is it Yojas? Did I have it right the first time? Shit. Using OTT right now, I'm already buried with it. Thank you. No, thank you. Now every time I'm going to go here to say, yeah, it's true. It's true. That's how I feel when my body crashes. Alright, so questions. Mastering question from DJ Hammerhead. Awaiting your question. Standing by to answer a question. Now downloading. So I have a solid mixdown and I go to master. Everything sounds clean in my headphones. And then on earbuds and in my car, my sub is way too much. It's so confusing. It's probably more of a mixed thing. All right, so first question, do you have KRKs? Do you have KRKs? That is my first question. And are you mixing your sub up because you've turned your sub down? So that's the first thing to find with your mixing setup. Your sub is always going to be too loud if your room is out of phase as well. Because sub, when it travels in a room, it travels omnidirectionally and linearly. So forward and back, but then in all directions. But the most power is forward and back. So that means that if your room is equal sided, meaning 12 by 12, something like that, then at your mix position, your sub is going to hit each other and collide, and they're going to phase out. All right, so you're not even using your monitors. Okay, so you're going to have to go and use your headphones as a reference. So go listen to something with good low end. I recommend Samba or in anything on encrypted audio, bro. Yeah, yeah. So like if your cones are over 6 inches and your room is less than 12 to 10 feet, then you're gonna most likely not be able to hear your sub. I have HS8s and the HS8 paired sub, and I just dampen my first and second reflections so I don't get that equal sound. But my room's not that big. I think it's like 15, and it's also a big square. Okay, so what was that reference, Rec? First and second reflections. So that means take a laser pointer from the top of your monitor, left and right, put it on the top. Wherever the laser hits the wall first is your first reflection. Go to that point and then aim it straight, perpendicular 90 degrees from there. And then on the parallel wall will be your second reflection. And you put dampening at both those spots and do the same thing for both monitors. And then you'll kind of dampen your mix position because your sub or the low end coming out of both of your monitors will not be summing at your mix position, creating standing waves or room nodes. Room nodes, they pretty much sum up in every corner in your room, hence why bass trap exists. It's called standing wave. So really loud, low frequencies and high frequencies get trapped in that low corner. They start creating cone filtering. Yeah. Zach, the homie, just got some Genelex 6.5. They are sweet. Sweet, dude. Those are nice, bro. Okay, so that's definitely going to be a problem. Any other questions about stuff? My best recommendation for a free fix to that is go build a cloud. You know, just go on top of a building, jump off, and try to lasso one. I'm just kidding. No, just get like a bunch of random wood, and then get a big panel, another wood panel. Chop up that wood into random sections, and then fill out that panel, and then put that right above your mix position. It'll diffuse all that standing wave material, and your mix position will be completely deadened, and you'll be able to hear sub. But then also get, if your room is super bad, go get SonarWorks and get the omnidirectional mic that comes with it and is paired for it, because that SonarWorks is the best room shooting, room correction device. Yeah, so most people cannot put a cloud in, not even just because they don't have like the right ceiling type, but you're in an apartment. Yeah, snag SonarWorks that'll even fix your bad headphones. I highly recommend Audio Technica M50X for your first pair of headphones. Audio-Technica M50X. I've been using that specific model for about 5 years now, and I do professional work in it. And I mix full tracks in it, and I master shit in it sometimes if I have to. My favorite ones would probably be the Odyssey or Odys. Odyssey headphones are 7.1 surround and allow you to mix and master in 7.1 surround from your headphones, dude. It's fucking nuts, bro. Yeah, the HD 280s are super good. I like the Sony HD 50. Those are really good. I use them for producing and DJing. I use my Sony HD 50s for DJing always. Yeah, those Avantones are actually really good. I've experienced some Avantones that are like open back. I just hate all open back headphones in general. I just hate them. They're just terrible. Just never get them. If you're trying to mix, if you're literally just going to be playing some video games and you want like a big open back headphone, chill. But if you're going to be mixing, like, do not get them. It's the biggest waste of money ever. I spent like $250 on some really expensive open back monitoring headphones, and I think more than that, and was disappointed. And then they were stolen. So it was a double disappointment, double dicking of disappointment. Yeah, so it's really just, yeah, I haven't actually heard the 770s. Sennheiser is really hit and miss though. Yo, what you making, G? I'm making some avant-garde fucking jizza randomness.
Was famous. He was the greatest. My father was famous. He was the greatest samurai. And he was the shogun's decapitator. He cut off the heads of